After my divorce, my parents sided with my unfaithful ex and refused to offer me any shelter. Now, 5 years later, they're trying to re-enter my life after hearing about my engagement. When my marriage ended 5 years ago, my parents severed ties with me. My ex, Greg, had been cheating with his assistant at work. I found out when I was browsing his phone one day, as I had long suspected something was wrong. I knew at that moment that our marriage was over. It was difficult for me because Greg and I had been together for over 10 years before we married. We had been high school sweethearts, our families being close friends. That's how we met and started dating. After high school, we had an on and off relationship, but at 22, our families started pressuring us to get married. So we did. We fought often after tying the knot. He cheated, something I never thought he would. I left the house that day after discovering the affair, utterly devastated. My first instinct was to go to my parents. I assumed Greg had already spoken to them. He likely expected me to come to them and tried to prevent that. To my shock, when I showed up at their door, they turned me away. I stood outside, pleading to stay with them for just a few days until I could find a place. But they refused, saying that Greg was still my husband and we should work things out. Even when I told them about his infidelity, they didn't seem to care. They told me they already knew about the affair because Greg had confessed it when he called them. My parents said that one person couldn't break a marriage, indirectly placing the blame on me for everything. It wasn't surprising, though. They had always treated me this way. I don't know why I thought they would help me back then. I had already shared my concerns about my marriage with them before Greg's betrayal. I told them I didn't want to be with him anymore, but they kept insisting I was too ambitious and didn't give my marriage enough time. They believe that's why it failed. When I tried to stay with them that day, they accused me of being more focused on my career than my marriage. I was fed up with their blame and left. I went to a friend's place to talk about my divorce, though I wasn't really ready for it yet. She graciously let me stay with her for 2 weeks. During that time, I saw a lawyer, filed for divorce, and started looking for a place to live. My friends were the only ones who supported me emotionally during that time. My parents didn't contact me except to criticize me for leaving Greg. Greg kept reaching out, claiming we could still fix things, that marriage counseling could help. He kept apologizing as if that would make a difference. Naturally, my parents sided with him, urging me to forgive him. Once I cut them out of my life, they stopped trying to reach out. After the divorce, I had no contact with them. I haven't spoken to them since, and I don't regret it. When we see each other at family gatherings organized by other relatives, we ignore each other. I'm fine with that, because they never seem to regret what they put me through. 5 years later, I'm now engaged to Adam, and my 3 years with him have been some of the happiest of my life. We met at his cafe where I was having lunch with friends. He came over to talk to us, and soon after, I learned he owned the cafe. After a few dates, we became serious. Within weeks, I discovered Adam's impressive business background. His father owns a large chain of bakeries, and Adam followed in his footsteps, opening his own restaurant. I was impressed, but I wasn't interested in his wealth. I'm a career woman, and I plan to keep working after our marriage. Unlike my parents, I'm not focused on his money. But once they heard about Adam, my parents immediately tried to reconnect with me. This happened last week, just days after I posted about my engagement on social media. I suspect a relative informed them about it. They probably looked into Adam and his family. 3 days after my announcement, I received an email from them. They congratulated me on my engagement, apologized for their past behavior, and expressed a desire to attend my wedding. They didn't mention Adam or his family directly, which was sensible. But I wasn't fooled. It felt strange that they reached out only after I got engaged, as though they'd been meaning to contact me, but only now felt bad about their actions. I didn't respond. But they didn't stop there. They reached out again, revealing their true intentions in a second email. This time, they mentioned Adam and his family, saying they were pleased with my choice. It felt as though they assumed I was only with him for his wealth, which was far from the truth. They also said they were proud of my prestigious family background. I found this arrogant and irritating, as it was clear they were more interested in my connection to wealth than in truly reconciling with me. I didn't know what they were trying to achieve, but I blocked them after reading the email. A few days of peace passed, but last night my parents showed up at Adam's apartment. Few people know where we live, so I'm not sure how they found out. When I saw them standing outside, I didn't open the door. Adam, who understands my family's history, answered the door himself. He called me over to speak with them, and I was grateful he stayed with me through the whole ordeal. He held my hand as I spoke to my parents, who apologized for only reaching out now. They said they had been avoiding me because they knew I would be angry, and they didn't want to seem interested in Adam's family more than in my forgiveness. I told them their reasons were invalid. They had been insensitive during my divorce, and I wouldn't have forgiven them back then, nor would I forgive them now. I didn't need them anymore, and after 5 years of silence, I was done. I told them to leave and warned them that if they came back, I'd call the police. My father yelled at me as I turned to close the door, calling me arrogant and saying I couldn't treat them this way just because I was marrying into a wealthy family. I was infuriated by his words. It wasn't about money at all. I told him this wasn't about marrying into wealth, but about their behavior. Despite all this time, they were still toxic, and cutting them out was the right thing to do. I had no intention of forgiving them. At that point, they turned to Adam, warning him about my attitude problem, blaming me for the end of my marriage. They even went so far as to mention Greg's affair with his receptionist. They boasted that Greg and the woman were happily married now with a child. They claimed I would never have a happy family because I was always acting superior, focusing too much on work instead of my marriage. They said my superiority complex had ruined my first marriage and would ruin my second. Adam, however, ignored their warnings and told them not to worry about him. He said he didn't care about their opinions and didn't need advice from people who had disrespected me. In a final, stunning statement, Adam told my parents he was happy for Greg, who had found love with the woman he cheated on me with, as it showed that they still supported Greg rather than me, even after all these years. He also told them that their financial situation was irrelevant and that they weren't part of our world. He slammed the door on them as they stood outside, stunned. They left, and I didn't expect any further drama. But this morning, my paternal grandparents called me. They lectured me about how I treated my parents and insisted I should apologize. It was surprising, since they had always been neutral about this situation, but now they were taking my parents' side. They said my parents had made mistakes, but had always tried their best for me. They also scolded me for not being more grateful for my parents and cautioned me against bragging about my wealth, especially since it wasn't mine. I explained that Adam had spoken to them, not me, but they insisted that it didn't matter who spoke. They thought I should stand up for my parents, even if I didn't want to forgive them. I told them that my parents had treated me badly, but they dismissed it. They only cared about my behavior. Frustrated, I told them that a man who disrespects my family would never respect me. They hung up shortly after. Though I love Adam and don't believe he did anything wrong, my grandparents' reaction has made me question my actions. Am I wrong for letting my wealthy fiancé speak his mind about my estranged parents? As time passed after the wedding, I tried to distance myself from the memories of my parents and their misguided attempts to reconnect. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own story, my future, untethered from their demands, judgments, and the unresolved wounds of the past. Charlie and I were building a life together, free of the toxic influence they had once imposed on me. But the unexpected, as it always does, found its way back into my life in the most peculiar of ways. It began with a phone call that I initially thought was a mistake. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it stirred a memory I couldn't immediately place. I hesitated, but answered it anyway, unsure of what I was expecting. "Hello?" I said, trying to disguise the nervousness creeping into my voice. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar at first, but then it clicked, an echo from my past. It was Nick, my ex-husband. "Hey, it's Nick," he said in an almost casual tone, as if no time had passed at all. "I know this might be strange, but I need to talk." My heart pounded in my chest. Why on earth would he be calling me now, after everything that had happened, after he betrayed me in the worst possible way? "I don't think we have anything left to say, Nick," I replied, my voice firm but tinged with emotion. "You made your choice years ago. I'm married now, and I'm happy with my life. There's no room for you here." "I understand," he said quietly, but there was something in his voice that made me pause. "But I need to apologize. I've been living with the guilt for so long, and I don't think I can move on until I make things right with you." I could barely believe my ears. Nick, the man who had hurt me so deeply, was calling me to apologize? It felt like a cruel joke. Yet there was a sincerity in his words, a vulnerability that caught me off guard. "You don't need to apologize, Nick. I'm not the person you need to make amends with anymore," I said, trying to sound resolute. "It's too late for that." "I don't know," he replied. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching these past years, and I've realized something that could change everything. I want to explain, and maybe, just maybe, there's a way for us to make peace." I paused. The line between anger and curiosity had become so thin, I wasn't sure which emotion would win out. But there was something in his voice, something different from the man I had once known. I agreed to meet him, just to hear him out, if only to bring closure to the chapter that had haunted me for so long. The next day we met at a quiet coffee shop, the place where we used to go when we were dating. The familiarity of it was unsettling. I hadn't been back here in years, and yet sitting across from him now, it felt like nothing had changed. Nick looked different, older, but there was a certain weight to his presence now. The cocky, arrogant attitude he once carried was gone, replaced by a humility I hadn't seen in him before. He had always been good at pretending, but this time he wasn't pretending. "I know this won't make up for the hurt I caused you, but I wanted to tell you the truth about everything," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I crossed my arms, waiting for him to continue, but my heart was already starting to race with an unknown anxiety. This wasn't about us getting back together. It couldn't be. But I needed to hear him out, to understand why, after all these years, he was doing this. "There's something I never told you," Nick said, his eyes shifting as though he was unsure how to continue. "When I cheated on you, I didn't just hurt you, I hurt someone else too, someone who's been a part of this entire story from the beginning." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Who else could he be talking about? Had there been more to his affair than I knew? "Who?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. Nick's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of regret. "It's not just about the affair anymore. It's about what happened after. The person I hurt more than anyone was your mother." I blinked, confused. "My mother? What are you talking about?" Nick leaned forward, his voice low as he continued. "Your parents have been hiding something from you, something that changes everything. They never wanted you to know the truth. They were afraid it would break you." A rush of questions flooded my mind. What was he saying? Why would my parents be involved in any of this? And why was he telling me this now? "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "Why would my parents? What could they possibly have to do with this?" Nick took a deep breath, his face conflicted. "They knew about the affair before you did. They knew everything. And after you found out, they made a deal with me. They told me I had to stay with you, to keep up the appearance of a happy marriage, because if I didn't, it would destroy them too. They were just as afraid of losing their status as they were of losing you." I felt my stomach drop. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My parents had known? They had known about the affair? And they had done nothing to stop it? The betrayal I had felt from Nick now felt like a distant memory compared to the flood of emotions surging through me. "But there's more," Nick continued, his voice heavy with shame. "Your mother? She was the one who told me about her plans to send you back to work, to tell you that you were too ambitious and that you needed to focus on your marriage. It wasn't just her advice, it was a directive. She thought that if you focused on being a better wife, you'd be less likely to question me. And it worked. You ignored your own instincts, just like they told you to. My head was spinning. It felt like the ground was giving way beneath me. My parents, the people who had always claimed to have my best interests at heart, had been manipulating me all along, pushing me to stay with a man who didn't deserve me. But why? I asked, barely able to hold back my tears. Why would they do that? They knew about your affair, and they still made me feel like I was the problem. Nick sighed, clearly exhausted by the weight of his own confession. Because they were afraid of what would happen if you found out the truth. They didn't want to lose their perfect image. Your mother, in particular, she's always been obsessed with how things appear to others. She's afraid of looking vulnerable, of losing control. The room seemed to close in around me, and I felt the walls of my entire life crumbling. Everything I had ever known, everything I had trusted, was falling apart before my eyes. I never meant for things to go this far, Nick said, his voice breaking. I was selfish, but I want to make things right, not just with you, but with your parents too. I owe them that much. I sat in stunned silence. My mind was racing. The man I had once loved, the man who had betrayed me in the worst way, was now trying to make amends, saying that the truth was finally coming to light. But there was still one question that remained, hanging in the air between us. If what you're saying is true, I said, finally finding my voice, then what happens now? What do I do with all of this? Nick's eyes softened, his gaze filled with regret. I think you need to make a choice. You can choose to forgive them, to accept that they were just as trapped in their own fears as I was, or you can choose to walk away, to build your life out of them in it. But no matter what you choose, you don't have to carry their burdens anymore. It's not your responsibility. The words hung in the air like an impossible decision. How could I forgive them? How could I ever trust them again after what they had done? But then something strange happened. For the first time, I felt free. Not because of Nick's apology, but because I finally understood the truth. I was no longer a victim in their narrative. I could write my own story from here on out, and that in itself was the most powerful thing of all. I don't know what I'll do yet, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. But I'm going to take my time. I have to figure out what's best for me, not them. And I don't owe anyone anything except my own happiness. Nick nodded solemnly. I understand. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. As he walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over. It could never be over. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had the power to choose my own path. And so I began the next chapter of my life, one where I was no longer bound by the past, where I could finally embrace my future. The unexpected truth had changed everything.